Hi everyone, this is Meenakshi Ramesh from tapyowaytohealing.com. Today I have another guest, a dear friend here with me to talk about as we continue the videos for April is Autism Awareness Month series. I have Brenden Pragasam here. Um, I want to read Brendan's bio before we begin our conversation. Brenden Pragasam is an industrial designer specializing in creating products that fight the presumptive norms of ableism and change the understanding of disability in modern cultures. These come from his experience as a brother to Aidan, an adult with ASD and propionic acidemia, as well as his recently received MFA in design and work with the Brain Foundation. So, what is MFA, Brendan?
So MFA is Master of Fine Arts. So
Oh, okay. Awesome,
yeah.
awesome. Excellent. Okay. So, over to you, Brendan. So, I want to begin asking you because you are a sibling of someone who has special needs, who's on the autism spectrum. My first question to you would be, can you talk about one of the gifts, the strengths of autism that you see in your brother, in Aidan? Yeah.
And Aidan, one of the strengths I see is always his bright personality and his friendliness to everyone. He loves to talk to people. He'll shout out to someone, be like, "Hey, how's it going?" And he just has that childlike exuberance to his everyday life, and it really sort of punches you into like this new perspective because I think for a lot of us, we get into work and then we get into that sort of like mode, that introversion that comes in normal society. And whenever I bring my brother in the room, he's always so excited and jubilant. And, it just brings in that level of enthusiasm into everyone around him.
Awesome. Yeah, I totally agree with every word that you say. That's just as even as you were talking about Aiden, it feels like, people who are listening to this, they may want to meet, it feels like, they want to meet Aiden. So that's a beautiful introduction. My next question to you would be, can you talk about one of the biggest obstacle challenge that you face, having a sibling on the autism spectrum?
Um, Having a sibling with ASD, one of the biggest challenges I obviously face is overall acceptance has been better over time. I think that, like in the mid 2000s and early 2000s, ASD was still something that was very hidden. Like the problems with things like ableism, which means the sort of like the sole acceptance of people who are fully abled. That was still pretty much a huge factor. But throughout Silicon Valley and throughout various is like methods of acceptance and stuff like that, that has sort of like diminished. But I think that the biggest problems that come with it is people not really knowing what autism entitles. There might be acceptance in the fact that someone has autism, and that might be a good thing in a room. It's like great, like people are welcome, but there's a very big difference between accepting that someone has something and accepting what that sort of brings with it, and whether that these people are being in relationships, whether they're being in groups, whether they're just trying to work in the workplace. The lack of context people have for what these people are truly going through, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and what like they can really be good at still is a huge factor in society that really needs to be addressed.
Very, very nicely said, Brandon. Yes, yes, there is awareness, but at the same time, awareness is acceptance, and acceptance is getting better. But there's so many other components involved in terms of catering to the needs of someone on the autism spectrum. And thank you for articulating it so very well. I want to move on to and talk about the face shield projects that we did. You came up with the idea during the pandemic, and if you can talk a little bit about to the audience as to how that project evolved and how what all things that you did as you moved on with the project, and how our children were able to be a small part of your project.
Sure. Yeah, here. have the face shield project right here. So basically what this was a face shield pandemic design. I just have very little information on this, but this was done at under a really short timeline. Maybe about 2 to 3 months. And the idea was to really incorporate people who had you know, different roles in Infuse, as well as the fact that, you know, a really short turnaround time into this really short-term projects. The idea was to make something that was really going to be using COVID-19, someone who works 8 to 9 hours in it for nurses and stuff like that. There were tons of different improvements on my end. You can kind of see how the production was going, but I really wanted to incorporate other people. And as you see, there's these little papers in there. And these papers come from an organization called Infuse, a nonprofit I am still a part of and I was a part of at the time. And what that nonprofit did is that we allowed people to volunteer, to 3D print. It gave a lot of different opportunities to people who were like trying to get into the field. I know personal people who started the 3D printing for this project, and basically it started their whole profession or their sort of interest in design to a point where they're graduating at this point, and the design is becoming their meal field of interest. But for people with special needs who are on the spectrum or whatever, it allowed them to really be part of this big community in a time when we were being isolated from communities, COVID especially, and it allowed them to make themselves feel like they're making a difference in this entire project where, you know, they can officially see that, yes, their work is officially being used for, you know, the benefit of the community, the benefit of the people, and all that good stuff. Yeah. And then, yeah, it did get a couple of awards, and these were sold on Etsy for a while. I believe you can still buy them. But yeah, all the work was done by a special need people, and I thank them a lot for that.
Yeah, and yeah, Brenden Pragasam was the idea. You were the one who brought forth the idea and brought it to fruition. And our children were able to be contribute in a small way by assembling in terms of the assembly and just putting the wires inside and locking them. And it was a very deeply fulfilling experience, Brendan, and thank you for doing this for the community. Thank you, and congratulations on winning the Jefferson Award. All credit goes to you.
Oh, you're
Thank you
welcome.
so much. Yeah. So now moving on to you did talk to me about the G-tube. Before we go into the details of the G-tube presentation, I want you to talk a little bit about Aidan and his feeding. That's how this idea came about, right? So if you can talk a little bit about how Aidan is being fed, and then you can move on to talking about your presentation.
Yeah, I do go into it a little bit in the presentation, but for a preface, Aidan has always been fed using something called a gastric tube. Now, this is very common among people who have some conditions and presumptive conditions, and it's also common in things like gastroparesis. You know, a lot of athletes get it after using steroids. It's a huge thing across like the entire spectrum of people. Um, what this means is that you're bypassing the upper digestive tract and you're putting food directly in the stomach. There's two ways you could do this. You could do this through the nose, or you could do it through a direct tube that's put into the stomach. My brother personally has always had a G tube, and while he can be fed through the mouth, it is not for reasons of food or protein, and basically it's solely for, you know, like placebo or, hey, getting used to the activity, if that makes sense. Um, yeah, so this has happened, I want to say, my, my mom has logged it at 3 years old. So I want to say
Mm-hmm.
97, 98 is when he started. And it just continued. And the reason I did this project is I was asking my mother, like, what were the real problems that you would love to be solved? And What do they look like? How do they sort of encompass themselves? And at first she was talking about things like, oh yeah, like entertainment, stuff like that, feeding Aidan in a car. And I'm like, okay, wait, feeding Aidan in a car. Okay. Um, what about feeding in general? And then she's like, yeah, like feeding in general is a big issue. And, the more that we looked into it, the more we saw problems with it. And this really encompasses the reason that I'm doing design at this point. The fact that, like we design things in a way that makes people look less able than they are. And I kind of go into it in the presentation, but the idea is that we're designing them for very particular medical circumstances. And when they're taken out of that context, what it forces people to do is look at others in a different perspective. Um, and that can be especially for G tubes because, like as I'm probably going to show in the presentation, people are forced to drag around IV poles or carry like 40-pound backpacks with, food and these really outdated pumps and stuff like that, which really just sets these fully functioning people aside and forces them to live a life where they have to explain this all. And when they go out to dinner or they go out to lunch with someone, they're far less accepted than they could be. And one of the things that I've been sort of looking at is that everyone looks to a cure for the solution, but we should also just be looking at the quality of life and how we can really incorporate different things to aid that in making people's lives a bit better.
Awesome. Awesome. So, how long did it take for you to complete this project, this YouTube project?
I want to say around 7 to 8 months. It's been a pretty big project. When I started, like it was really small scale. It was just my brother, and there aren't a lot of statistics on G-tubes. There's a lot of anecdotal things because the G-tube community is very large, and it does span many different symptoms and disorders. But as far as pure statistics, because it's not a very well-researched field, as far as like who uses it and what their demographics are, it was very difficult to sort of make a case for it. After I started to pull in some data, like I could eventually figure out that those around 1.3 million people who have G-tubes, it started to make more sense. Yeah, it's actually much larger than we all think. And, there's a lot of people nowadays who are coming out about it who, have like pretty normal lives who, are living with as children or are living with, all types of other things and living as teachers, as bloggers. And, it's something that society just really has to sort of embrace. And based on sort of medical outcomes and things that are happening in the future, they say that G-tube, just G-tube usage is going to go up significantly over the next period of time, especially by 2029. They're predicting a huge uprise. I had it in one of my presentations. It's a massive statistic. I think something like, I just want to get the number right. Okay, so right now the industry is at $478 billion. By 2029, they're guessing it's going to be around $890.7 billion. So
Wow.
yeah.
And as you were talking about the GTP, I feel, do you think there are more people in the senior population using this, Brenden, the senior citizens, people who are in hospice care and who are in, the older people?
That you would be surprised because the presumption that is a large presumption between all of us that yeah, it is people with who are part of the elderly population who are using this the most. But because of like the curing and the new disorders that are being found, and just generally the general health of people, it spans like very, very large. There are people nowadays who are being diagnosed at 6 months old who are using them for their entire life. So
Wow.
the sort of lifespan of this is sort of like this sort of situation has grown dramatically.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
I would say in the 1980s and 90s, that's when we started to see this as a last resort
mm,
because the quality of life was so bad back then, and it
mm,
still is. It's very similar to that, but as it's become accepted, the fact that it might not be great for someone to eat when they have a very um, thin-skinned throat or, other sort of symptoms or large stomach acid reflux
mm.
or different things like that. It's becoming more of an accepted solution to things. So it's happening at a
Mm.
younger demographic, if that makes sense. So yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. If you can share some visuals of your, the research and what you did, and if you can talk a little bit about how the project that you did, how it differs from all the other G tubes that are available in the market. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll definitely try to talk a lot about that. Let's see, share this. So this is what the product looks like. It's called Pumped. And
Hmm.
um, I try to go through everything because this was made to present to people who had like no experience with ASD or any sort of experiences like this. So I'll go through the entire process. Um, my main question I want to solve was how might we change G-tube feeding to fit a more active lifestyle? And every story has a small beginning, and this small beginning became my brother. Um, as you know now, Aidan Pragasam has a metabolic condition known as probiotic acidemia and has been tube fed his entire life. He loves to relax outside, go on adventures, and even journey to new places. But for my brother, G2 feeding has inhibited him from living the active lifestyle that he so wants to live through his personality. Now, G2 feeding is a process that bypasses the upper digestive tract through either nasal or gastric methods. You can see right here, this is what a nasal tube looks like, and then here's what a gastric tube looks like. And then generally, this is what a G tube looks like. You have a pump that's strapped to an IV pole with a feed bag that's put on top of the clamp. Um, this is great for hospital sort of situations because it's very easy for nurses to hook on different feeding bags. It's also very easy to replace pumps, and everything is super clearly visible. So it allows for a nurse to switch out things really quickly. But as I'm going to go into, it's not very great for the situations that a lot of people are dealing with in their daily lives. Now, there's two different methods that people choose for feeding. There's one called gravity feed and one called pump feed. Uh, Gravity feed is less setup, but by far is more convenient for a couple of different reasons. Um, while it is more convenient, though, it does need a second person and it can be very messy. Pump feed is completely the opposite. It is more precise, more independent, but it is very intense to set up. You're talking about 15 or 20 minutes. And the form factor is something that people are going to notice. You're never going to go get away with the fact that a pump nowadays is something that, like you can just hide somewhere or you can just wear without someone asking you something. Um, so this is what a setup looks like with a G2 pump. You have an IV pole and then you have this clamp and you're actually clamping it to that. You're mounting this sort of arcane, I want to say it's very similar to if you've seen an old TV. Imagine an old TV that you can hold in your hand or an old TV that's half the size of a piece of paper. That's pretty much what a feeding tube pump feels like. Around the same weight too, actually. So yeah, you clamp this, you put this on, you put a feeding bag on, and then there's these loads of settings and different menus and stuff, which are really complicated for someone who doesn't really know what all these things do. But we're made for people in a medical setting like a hospital. So, as I said before, gravity feed can be more convenient, but it comes with many dangers. And just this quote that if you're traveling with someone, while it's more conspicuous to use a pump, it's better to use gravity feed. Like you can see how much of a struggle it is, where you're basically just pouring food into a stomach, and you got this gigantic sort of like flask that you're pouring it in with. It's just a very cumbersome process, and it doesn't really agree with everyone's bodies as well. So there's many different cons for it, but so far this is like the process that most people go with. And this brings up a larger question. How do you feed someone in everyday life? Whether you're on a bus, do you really want to go out and feed someone in public while you're pouring different liquids directly going to someone's stomach with people staring at you? Or are you going to go to a bathroom? Like, how sanitary is that to try to eat your lunch there? These are a lot of questions that people are waged with in daily life, especially my brother. And, there's a lot of different sacrifices we've had to make. You would think that, going to a first aid place is going to be a great place for doing something like this. But because there's a lot of children ask questions, it can be a very unaccepted thing. So it's become a question that a lot of these people suffer with on a daily basis. Um, my first thing was a small world redesign. I wanted to try to redesign something directly for my brother. And you can kind of see what this started to look like. It's super rudimentary. It just has a circuit board, a battery, and a prosthetic pump, which basically pumps all the liquid from a bottle directly into his body. And then you can see a video. I don't know if this video is playing.
Awesome, Brenden. Wow, so small and
Yeah,
compact. Yeah.
yeah.
And
I'm
he's just like Aidan is just able to feed himself.
exactly.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's what I was
amazing.
leaning for, is independence. Because
Wow.
my brother, like at this point, he was able to feed himself at different places and in different social situations.
Hmm.
And at the very end of the day, without anyone sort of like asking any questions. Of course, this looks extremely different from how we would be fed, but it's not so different to the point where he was socially isolated.
Mm-hmm.
But this was only one example. There's people like Renee who have this cancer known as sarcoma, and there's also different people like this weightlifter who has had different G tubes throughout his life. And then in the end, there's like 1.3 million people who have G tubes and a large community of them growing. A lot of these people are outgoing, active, and adventurous.
Fantastic. Yeah. So
So this,
this so
yeah,
this girl currently, as she's skating, she's on a G tube also, right?
exactly. Yeah.
Right. Hmm.
So she's been carrying a G tube. I think that she was tube fed since like 13 or 14 in the
Hmm.
vlogs.
Hmm.
But yeah, you can kind of see how a lot of these people are doing very normal activities and trying to live and do these very normal things, but hampered by a very unergonomic life.
Hmm.
And you can kind of see what this entitles. If you were going to own a G tube, there's
Hmm.
these 47-page manuals on how to use them. This
Hmm.
is what her
Wow.
backpack looked like. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's ridiculous that this is the official solution.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's basically a surgical bag
Hmm.
strapped with a pump in like a weird counter angle direction. Um, and these pumps are extremely expensive.
Hmm.
It's around $800 out of pocket, and
Wow.
that's why a lot of these pumps are basically circulated for 10 to 12 years. And
Hmm. Hmm.
even the ones that my brother has, there's co-signed to be refurbished around 2010 to 2011,
Hmm.
and that really shows when the technology was from too, because you're dealing with something that basically was from a different decade. And
Hmm.
that means that a lot of the modernizing solutions that we have now are not really there for them. But yeah, I did a lot of real world interviews. And, the current process, as we know now, is difficult to use and very unadaptable. And there's a lot of complaints due to the durability and the inconvenience of it. As I said before, and as you can see from these blogs, a lot of these people are stuck to an IV pole, which means if they are working professionals, they're literally taking an IV pole into the workplace and dragging it around with them, which they noticed to tell people that, hey, this is not me with like an eating disorder or anything like that. It's just me trying to live a normal life. And it's really sad that this is a solution that we provided for them. A lot of people have talked about when they go on trips, they have to carry two of them because they can't really find a charger for these things. Parts are really hard to come by. It's basically like ordering a prescription for something that's really rare. So you have to like wait about 20 days for it to come. It's usually around $500. It can be a really hassle for someone who needs this basically to feed themselves every day. And it can almost be life-threatening at some points. So yeah. Another insight was integration into society, which is a huge priority of this sort of thing. And then this is a video. So this person hasn't been able to eat when they're 13, since they were 13. And it's a big factor in her personal integration in society. And a lot of these people, these backpacks are huge, which I've mentioned before. And there's a quote from someone in a talk I did that says sometimes these backpacks are bigger than they are. And it's true. And it's kind of interesting to imagine, like, okay, these backpacks look ridiculous on someone who's maybe around 14 to 26, but imagine these backpacks on a 4-year-old, or imagine it, or on a 6-month-old, like the parents trying to carry this backpack with them on a stroller. It becomes an entire mess in itself, and it's something that just really needs to be improved. And obviously the last thing is a pathway to active independence. A lot of these people don't get a lot of active time because they're either stuck on a certain setting or, stuck to a certain place. An example can be one of the people that we know, they can only feed her in a wheelchair. And because they've only been able to set up in a wheelchair because the setup is so intensive and it takes so long, she wasn't getting enough active time. And what that means is that it directly affects their health and the way that they live their lives. And while it's not as extreme for some people will adapt to backpacks, some people will adapt to have caretakers. It does mean that you need more assistance throughout your life than you would have before. And then here's another thing, that caretakers will forget. No one's perfect, and it's not a big thing that we want to say that, oh yeah, well, caretakers are potentially doing so. They're not. But when it comes down to it, no one understands a condition more than their mothers and fathers and their parents or their medical doctors. And when it comes to a caretaker who's doing a 9-to-5 job, it's very common for them to forget feeding food. And now we can imagine all of ourselves forgetting lunch or dinner and it being a huge thing. But for a lot of these people, they're on a medical schedule and it is a much larger thing for their personal health. And this was a quote that I had from, my mother, who said, I never know if my child has been fed, so it can be really difficult to send them out. I try to explain to my caretaker, but they never remember. It's a huge factor in why we can't just send Aidan or even someone who's perfectly able in their teens or preteens to just go out, because we can't just trust a caretaker to feed them at that particular moment. So I did a lot of prototyping for this. I think the goal was to make this more of a tech accessory and not a medical burden. And that means that it has to be round, it has to be friendly, emotive. It's not something that should look medically more than it just looks like something you're wearing because you want to wear it. I created this sort of mood board for different things that people liked, friendly things, biological things, different things that were customizable that you would like to own. You know, instead of having this something that you're mandated to wear, this should be something that you sort of buy and you cradle, like that iPhone that you chose in a particular color, or maybe a keychain or something like that. So I did a lot of different sketching, and I wanted to focus on how does this blend in without being something you have to hide over time. You know, like there's a difference between having something which you have to force someone to see every single time and something that, you can mention it and people are just going to accept it. But, it's still something that you can go on with your daily life with. And there's a lot of different prototyping that goes into this. I'm not going to go into the extremes of it, but the fact is, it's much harder with something like this because there's no form that's defined by this yet. When you're designing something like a smartphone, or you're designing something like a watch, you already know what that's going to look like. It's going to look like a watch. It's going to look like a phone. And if you're breaking that norm, yeah, like you're breaking in a particular way. But with something like this pump, because this pump was going to function so differently from the pumps that exist, it's going to look completely different, and it's going to function completely different as well. And then this is what the modern pump looks like. Instead of being something that was huge and sort of blocky, it's super sleek and really friendly. And the idea is that this adapts to your life. And it's not the other way around. You're not adapting to it. It has a super simple sort of touchscreen, and it has hardware buttons to make it good for elderly and younger people. And it can fit different situations as well. One of the bigger things was tube feeding changes. Something which is really difficult on earlier pumps because you have to clamp a bunch of things, you have to loosen a bunch of things. It's just really simple on this pump, and I wanted to make that essential because a lot of the different things that lead to malmaintenance of these pumps is the fact that the tubes are really hard to replace, and sometimes people will just choose not to. Over time, those tubes will get clogged with food, which leads to other stomach problems and so on and so forth. And then, yeah, I wanted to make sure that accessories for this were super available. So Apple actually released a patent to their MagSafe, which means that anyone can use it. And as a result, this pump can use MagSafe. And what that means for the consumer and what that means for all these people is that you can go out to a Walgreens and you can buy an extended battery for your pump. Or you can buy, like a smart, like a little car mount for your pump. Or maybe, per se, a little wall mount for your pump. And that really incorporates so many different problems that we're having here. Instead of you having to order something that's going to take 4 months and that's going to be $500 because it's going to be made in a limited quantity and it's by only one medical company, you can go to the Apple store. You can go to a Best Buy and you will be able to find what you need. And this not only becomes a convenience thing, this can be life-saving when it comes to something like buying an extended battery or having something for a trip. And it's something that I really sort of fleshed out later. You can see this is what a pump's sort of normal use would look like. So you can see this person is idly, like the pump is wirelessly charging, the person is checking their phone. If there's an error, the pump will chime. They can just pick it up. It's on a magnet, so they can just pick it up and check what it is. And they can just go through a touchscreen and see an error tutorial on how to fix it. And that makes it super simple for someone who's an independent to sort of like figure it out, as well as caretakers to just glance to the left or right and make sure that everything's going okay. And I talked a lot about personalization before. I will be prototyping an actual like website maker for this per se, kind of like Build-A-Bear Workshop or something like that, where you can choose different colors, you can choose different sort of accents to really make it something that fits your particular wardrobe. And that's definitely something that I research for people who are younger. Like if people are from that teen to preteen, to even if they're in like that 3 to 6 year old phase, having something that is in their favorite colors means that they're way more accepting to it. it becomes something that is theirs in a way that you can't describe if it's just black or white. Um, and then, yeah, the final thing is this is what the app would look like. There is an app that's incorporated with this that parents can download. They can check on the duration of feeds. They can check on when those feeds have happened, if different errors have come up. Like, let's just say that food has been spilled, or, like if a certain caretaker did not feed them at a certain time, they'll be able to see it through the app. And they can also see if the pump is connected as well. And the big thing is also caretaker monitoring. So they can monitor the caretakers over time and see how reliable they really are at making sure a person is fed. And I believe that, yeah, there's a feature of the project which I'm going to improve the size. It's a bit large for what I want, but there's room for improvement. And I do eventually want to make my own backpack that's going to go on with this. Right now, you would kind of just have to use like a sling bag or something like that. It's not that big of a deal, but like there's a lot of different necessities that people have, like having different syringes, and they want it to be super inconspicuous. So it's a worthwhile venture, but it's just not happening at this moment.
Could you go back to the previous slide, Brenden? The previous one. The previous one. No, the next one. Sorry.
Oh, this one?
Yes, many users still find the pump large. Okay, meaning that there's, I know you talked about it. I missed reading it. That's why I wanted to see.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
Awesome, Brennan. This is just so, it's so exciting to see Aidan already use it. And two questions came to my mind was a lot of, individuals on the autism spectrum, they have all these gut issues, and many of them have acid reflux problems. I'm just thinking, if that population would also benefit from, not that I'm not a medical doctor, but my mind was again going towards the ASD population. So
oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely made for someone who could be on a spectrum or could be part of that population, because what you would do is you would be able to schedule all the different feedings through the app, and like the person would just live their normal life. Or someone with ASD, the great thing about this is that now that it's on a reminder app and it's on a particular schedule, it's much easier for someone with ASD to meticulously track that and to put in all the statistics and stuff like that. It's much less of like this regimented medical system, and it could be a lot similar to something that someone with ASD is doing in their daily life. Whether it's, logging certain calories, or any sort of thing that you could treat someone to do and train someone to do over time. So yeah.
Right. And what would be the cost of this pump, Aidan, just roughly when it goes live? Like, what is your idea?
I'm thinking originally I wanted it to be around the $300 mark, but I'm thinking maybe around the $500 to $600 mark, just not because of the parts themselves, but because of all the development that's going to go into it. Obviously there's going to have to be a really reliable app if that's what people are relying on. The pump also has to be super intuitive and touchscreens, stuff like that. And, so I'm thinking around maybe 500, 600. Obviously, I would try to make it cheaper. I don't want to make the bottom line of it super, super high. But, like I just want to be reasonable with, like what this could really cost to make. But yeah.
Awesome, Brendan. This has been a great presentation, and congratulations again for, thinking, even though you developed this product with Aidan in mind. I'm sure it's going to benefit a lot of people from all the statistics that you're giving, that you gave at the beginning of the presentation. I think it's going to be a great model, and a lot of people are going to benefit from it. So just, if you can stop screen share.
Definitely. Sounds great. Yeah. One last note, if anyone wants to see it in person, I am hosting an exhibition, and that's going to be in San Francisco on May 12th to the 13th, and that's open to anyone. So yeah, then welcome to join.
Sure, sure. Thank you for sharing those dates, Brenden. And any final thoughts, like, a word or a phrase that you want to share about autism, because this is Autism Awareness Month?
A word or phrase. Um,
Or a message to the people who still are not aware of autism, or, they don't have the awareness. It's for anything that you want to share.
I guess the biggest thing I want to share is go meet someone with ASD, you know, and don't just meet them on just a cordial basis. Like, get to know them because a lot of them have great personalities, and
Right.
a lot of them may have better personalities and better things to offer than you might have even thought of. A lot of these people are genuine. A lot of these people are super kind. And a lot of these people are lacking in that social circle because people don't understand them yet.
Right,
So
right, yeah,
if you haven't yet, go out, meet
yeah.
someone.
Beautifully said, Brenden. Thank you so much, Brenden. Ever since I've known you, you're one of those very few people who is very heart centered, and I can, when someone is heart centered, when you come from that space, anything that you put your focus on, it just blooms and blossoms beautifully, Brenden. That's all I want to say. So keep shining, keep creating, and amaze this world with all your creativity, brilliance, and your kind heart. And wishing you all the best, Brendan.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing all your insights and wisdom for my channel. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a nice day.
Bye.